Good evening, everybody. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. I don't know if you could hear me better today, but some people have requested that I get an AirPod.
I have one ear. She has the other ear. We're attempting a, next level audio this evening.
Let's see if it works. Let's see what people say. Hold on, I have to get
All right.
on here.
Sounds good. So that's the voice of my wife, Alex, who sits just behind on camera. We'll flip the camera on her tonight. Hi from Anchorage, Alaska. Hello, Annie, Alaska 57.
That is someplace that you really want to go.
That's the only state I haven't gotten to. I've gotten to all 49 states. Alaska would be number 50. And so, Annie, we're looking for tips at some point. Times of year we should be going there, and where to go.
I've been in. I was there when it was light out, like 24 hours.
So summertime.
Very cool.
We had a husky growing up a couple years in Chicago, Siberian husky. So I was always into the books about the Iditarod and whatnot.
Hello from Hawaii. You're getting hello from.
Oh, we got Hawaii too.
Naples,
So we got both of our newest states, not just the lower 48 represented. We've had some interesting international DMs also, folks across Europe, Africa, Asia, Central America, interested in Ukraine, interested in a whole variety of issues. So welcome one, welcome all.
So you wanted me to mention to you, I just don't want to forget this, that tomorrow is one of your favorite days. Is that what you said?
Yes. Tomorrow is March 15th, Ides of March, for folks who've read Shakespeare. Or are familiar with the Julius Caesar story. The day would have been 2066 years ago when Julius Caesar was assassinated at Brute by who he thought was his best friend. Caesar allegedly had seen a seer of things, a futurist, what's it called? Psychic of sorts, reportedly, who said, "Beware of the Ides of March." The Ides, the central period of each month, were important in the Roman calendar, though some people think it was just basically made up by English writers, including Shakespeare. So, But, interestingly, as we talk about the assassination of Vladimir Putin, or people are like, why can't we just get rid of Putin? I'm like, well, Caesar was assassinated thinking that his assassination would save the Roman Republic and democracy, and it did not turn out that way. So you never know what you're going to get when you play with that sort of thing. So only time is relevant.
What are you going to be talking about tonight, Mosh?
So a few things, though I did notice somebody says that they don't have badges again this week. Badges are bottom of the screen. Alec, do you have them this week? If not, take a screenshot, send it to me. We're still working some IT stuff out here. Badges are a way to kind of help fund what we're doing. If you like what we're talking about. You don't have them either, huh? All right, well, last week, a couple people had it, some people didn't. Either way, there's a lot to get to on Russia, Ukraine, though I also got questions on China, COVID, inflation, and I think those were the biggest issues. A couple of random topics, but I think 95% of your questions were in regards to Ukraine. Sort of crazy. Nobody has badges. Oh, somebody has badges. Anyway, appreciate all of you who have signed up for the newsletter as well. We are officially now 1 month into the newsletter. Look forward to your feedback on that. Just an interview today with a leading nuclear scientist to talk all things Chernobyl and nuclear power plants. That'll be in Wednesday's newsletter. Rest assured, folks, a lot of new safety and security features have been added since Chernobyl and actually since Fukushima, Japan, 10 years ago. So it should hopefully bring down some people's blood pressure when you see these headlines going on about like Chernobyl and this, and he explains exactly, as somebody who's worked in nuclear power plants for 40 years, exactly what's going on. So there's your sneak peek at Wednesday.
So people are asking me what your Venmo is. I'm going to post it right now.
Cool.
At Mo Digital LLC.
Yes.
Can people hear me better today?
Yeah, we've given Al one of the AirPods today, so you guys can hear her more clearly. Does that? I don't know. Oh, we got some hearts. Great.
And someone just said, Kate just said, your background looks just like your old apartment.
We've recreated it. These are shelves from CB Great and Pearl, CB2, CB Dose. We brought some people over, but like I think we're gonna set up the office. We'll create some various looks here, but we've replicated this look
nice. It feels like home.
in a different corner.
It feels like
We don't want to shock the system.
And your brother, if anyone's looking for someone, an AV.
Oh yeah, my brother, Jay Wanunu, Joinounu, does home theater setups based out of Chicago. So if you're looking for somebody who knows how all the wires work and can set up all your entertainment center needs, my brother, available in Chicago, has his own business. But let's get to the news, because you had a lot of questions. This is what we know right now. Day 19 of the war. We're going into day 20. We're nearly 3 weeks in, folks. Diplomatic efforts have showed no signs of progress. The Russians, the Ukrainians continue to meet. The Ukrainians are like, listen, can we get to a ceasefire here? The Russians, for a while now, have been sending relatively mid-level, low-level folks to these talks. They did have the key foreign ministry folks in the talks last week in Turkey, but it does not appear like the Russians are taking this seriously. Something to keep in mind during warfare is countries who have some sort of goal to achieve, whether it be land or some other end results, tend to avoid the ceasefire for as long as they can, because once the ceasefire is in place, it is, breaking the ceasefire is not a good thing. So you see the Russians right now trying basically to run out the clock here for as long as they can. And that's unfortunate for the Ukrainians, who are seeing some horrendous casualties, damage, civilians stuck in a number of cities. The UN has put the civilian toll at somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 civilians, but unfortunately that total is far, far higher. You've seen the reports of the mass graves. The UN can't even get to half the places, nor can the Ukrainian government. So it's going to be... we're going to see some really unfortunate headlines. Not hopeful. We're going to see some unfortunate headlines when this war hopefully stops soon. You've seen the damage too. You're going to talk about hundreds of billions of dollars of damage in Ukraine, a rebuilding effort that could take years to could take decades, and is going to need a lot of foreign assistance to help rebuild the country. Because also keep in mind that there's a lot of refugees right now, right? More than 2 million have left the country. Some of those people aren't coming back to Ukraine. And so the rebuilding effort will be that much more difficult for the people who remain behind, right? So that's what we have going on in terms of diplomatic talks. The Israeli Prime Minister continues to talk to both sides. Putin talked to him today, Bennett. He did speak to Zelensky over the weekend. They're focused on the ceasefire. So are the Germans and the French, who are speaking to Putin as well. And then you have this whole situation in regards to the Chinese. You've seen the reports that the Russians, at some point in the past couple of weeks, have been asking the Chinese for aid. The Russians say, we didn't do that. The Chinese say, we didn't get that request. Neither government tends to be very open, transparent, or truthful when it comes to those things. So it's unclear what exactly the request was between weapons and economic aid. The Chinese have been kind of running a very interesting walking an interesting tightrope here between the West and the Russians, right? Because at the same time, Beijing has refused to call it an invasion. They've kept normal trade ties with the Russians, so they haven't joined in on the sanctions. But at the same time, the Chinese have said they're very worried about what's going on there.
Mosh, you have someone that you have to...
Block?
Yes.
Oh. Which one is it?
Is he flow?
Oh,
I
okay.
can't wait for those moderator settings, Mosh, so I could help.
Oh, I can add you as a moderator right now.
Oh, great.
A moderator? No, cancel. Wait.
Melissa also had a good idea to put your Venmo up. You could pin it.
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
Having an issue.
I'll do that next time. Okay.
And then someone said that sometimes only one mic is working on the AirPods, so in your Bluetooth settings you have to add to both mics. But can you guys hear me right now?
Can you hear my wife?
Some people are saying no.
I think you got to come closer.
If the AirPod's working, then I would need to come closer.
Well, I have both. Okay.
Yeah.
So, So, in regards to the Chinese right now, a big meeting happened today in Italy between the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the Chinese. And one thing to know about China is China does not like to be told what to do. And yet Sullivan went in saying, like, we're going to tell China there are ramifications for trying to help the Russians. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of what goes on here. It will be, I got a couple questions like, will we know if the Chinese end up helping the Russians? Sure. I mean, some things are pretty overt. If they send them weapons, it'll at some point be clear that the Chinese assisted them in some way, weapons-wise. The Chinese are running a really, there's a lot of interesting dynamics here because the Chinese also don't, like the Russians, like to be told by the Americans what to do. And so you've seen over the course of the last 50 years, but especially the past 10 years, kind of a coming together between the Russians and the Chinese saying like, what's with this American unipolar world where they like run the, So we're getting all these new bots joining the discussion, aren't we? Anyway, we'll see what goes on there. You're not going to see some sort of major declaration. I think the Chinese will continue to ride the line. Let's see what goes on there. As far as refugees are concerned, we talked about nearly more than 2 million refugees. I keep trying to update the maps. A lot of questions are coming in about why some of the some of the Ukrainians are going into Russia. Nearly 150,000 Ukrainians have left for Russia. Typically, they're from the eastern province, and there's another person that needs to be blocked. Just keeps coming back. How do these people get? Well, actually, I guess it's a sign of success, right? If you keep getting bots, that means that more people are discovering the thing. Anyway, let's see if EasyFlow comes back a third time with yet another account.
Whack-a-mole.
It's totally whack-a-mole with this. Alex, if you actually send a message, then I can add you as a moderator, and then
Hi.
And then I can make you, the thing. Oh, people want to turn off comments? That's how you ask questions.
No, I love the comments.
I love the comments.
We
Here,
need the comments.
here, Al, confirm. You should now have an alert that you're a moderator.
Wow.
It's a new feature on Instagram. All right, so that's the deal with the Chinese refugees. The question is in regards to why some of the refugees are going into Russia. Obviously, there's a number of ethnic Russians, especially in the eastern provinces of Ukraine. So that would explain why you're seeing some of the Ukrainians leave for Russia, and then like a real handful have left for Belarus. All right. Those are the big headlines there. I'm still waiting on an update. We're praying tonight for the Fox News journalist, Benjamin Hall, the British journalist who reports for Fox News, who was wounded today reporting, obviously today after you saw an attack on 2 journalists, and including one American who was killed, Renault. There were a couple of obituaries in the New York Times and some other publications. Actually, I was telling Alex that during my time at CBS, we talked to him and his brother, who were incredible foreign journalists who went into some of the most difficult circumstances to tell stories. And he, with his colleague yesterday, were targeted by the Russian military. You have also people are like, well, what do we know about this? Well, what you also know is that the Sky News team more than a week ago was targeted by Russian troops. Typically, journalists considered civilians during wartime, and both sides typically avoid firing on journalists, independent journalists, civilians. And it's very unfortunate to see what is going on there now. Obviously, there's a goal there when you're targeting journalists, which is you don't want pictures to get out. You don't want the story to get out. And it's very unfortunate and tragic that somebody has lost their life. And we have another journalist tonight who's fighting for theirs in a hospital there. Final headline, and we'll get to your questions, is the Russian journalist who is on the most powerful, highly watched Russian television network, Channel 1, Marina Ossianikova. I hope I got that close to right. Marina Ossianikova. She pre-taped a video statement so she could get a message out there, and then decided during the broadcast this evening, earlier this afternoon, U.S. time, to interrupt the broadcast with a sign saying, "Stop the war, don't believe the propaganda, they're lying to you." What we know right now is that she was taken into custody by police in Moscow, that she's represented by a lawyer who has also been protesting Russian police actions. and we're getting information from human rights activists as they still exist in Russia.
What do you think is going to
There's a lot of
happen to
concern
her?
about her. I don't know. I don't know what Putin does and what the Russian government does, but they are not handling dissent very well. There's videos coming out across Russia of people just holding up blank signs without even messages on them and being arrested by the police. And then somebody had a sign that just said, "This is a sign," and the Russians are having zero tolerance for anything that remotely looks like dissent, but incredibly brave. And she said, that she has been working for state television for a long time. They've been lying to the people for a long time. They didn't stand up to Putin for many years. And she decided today to take that moment, and she got about 6 or 7 seconds up there with the sign before they blocked her with video.
And she was smart. She recorded beforehand what the meaning behind.
Oh, very smart, right? Because she's not going to get her message out there. So pre-taping, she knows this country well enough to pre-tape a message, have it, out there with somebody who can then release it upon her request. So those are the big things there. And then last but not least, oil prices started to drive down today. They're down 30% from the peak last week. And something we talked about last week in that newsletter I put out was the fact that you have supply, you have demand, and then you have geopolitics, and then you have traders and speculators trading on those prices. So, oil, it's not as simple as if we pumped more oil would be, gas would be cheaper. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to the marketplace, and you're seeing it here. It went up 30%, it went down 30%, and why did it go down 30% in the last day? Well, some folks on Wall Street and traders around the world were like, I think we're closer to the end of this war, and China has a new Omicron surge. Remember, China has shut down a lot of stuff, so there's not much natural immunity, and their vaccines are not very effective over there. And so they're shutting down basically 40 million people. It'd be like shutting down the state of California, Shenzhen and Shanghai, two huge cities. So there's supply chain issues, and there's demand issues. China needs a lot of oil, and so if you're shutting down two major cities, less oil is needed, well, price of oil comes down, right? Simple as that. So that's what you're seeing in terms of the oil markets. So those are the big headlines there. And I hand it over to my wife.
Wow. Well,
for many of your questions.
You spoke for a couple. We have so many questions.
Yeah.
So, okay, some great questions. Whitney, as in Houston, says, when will the Russian people do something? And then Corcoran said, why do the police officers just blindly follow?
You follow orders in a police state. You follow orders in an authoritarian state. When you realize that people who protest and people who dissent are sent to literally Siberia because
or killed,
or journalists are killed on a bridge, or Navalny, the opposition leader, is poisoned, or Sergei Skripal, the intelligence agent, is poisoned. You get the hint that you sort of have a compromise with leadership, that you've given up a certain amount of rights for a certain amount of wealth, so to speak, in that country. That, what Putin promised was a life that was better than the Soviet Union for 50 years and the poverty that the Russian people had. And you give up a certain amount of rights, and that's the sort of deal. Now, as far as the Russian people rising up, you've seen thousands, probably more than 10,000 now, brave Russians take to the streets and protest. At the same time, you don't know what their fate's going to be. Do they still have a future in this country? And that's effectively what it is. Now, notably, what Marina, the journalist, said in her video today is they can't arrest all of us. They can't put tens of millions of Russians in jail. If we all rise up, we have the power. And I think Putin knows that. And by the way, Putin also, one of the reasons he needs this war to succeed, as far as he's concerned, is that he, looking back at the last 200 years of Russian history, knows that when a significant war fails, the Russian leader typically goes down. That was true during the Tsar. That was true during the Soviet Union. And Putin knows that. And that's something to bear in mind, which is why people are like, when's this going to end? And you're like, Putin can't afford to lose here, folks. Because he also knows that he's going to have to face the people who are dealing with, everything closing down to the McDonald's in their country. And they're like, wait, we had a deal here. We're giving up certain rights, and you're giving us, global acceptance and, a new economy and tech and, stuff that's the bargain. And right now, the government is not appearing to hold up its end of the bargain. And that's the concern the government would have, is that the people realize that. And so it's not as simple as just all your communications are monitored. You got to have a VPN to be critical of the government. They've made it difficult for journalists to do their job. It's difficult to be in Russia right now if you don't agree with the government.
Yeah.
What else we got?
So you're getting a lot of questions on your shirt and Monu's merch. So
Al made merch, everybody. She took the logo, put it on a t-shirt.
I'm dabbling
And
in
then,
merch.
and then she did that on the back.
So
She was dabbling in the merch.
Hopefully in the next, month or two, we'll have a something that
We're working on it.
Thank you guys for
Thank
all
you
your
guys.
support and wanting merch. We'll definitely get
Mo clothes.
Amy
Cruz says. We need Mo clothes.
What someone said, Mo Mafia.
Mo Mafia.
Mo New
Yeah.
Mafia. Okay.
All right.
So you okay. So so many questions. iPort said, what's happening with the surge of COVID cases in Europe and China? You discussed that already. Is there anything else?
Briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that the significant case surges we're seeing right now are in the Far East, in South Korea, and in China. The Chinese, of course, have tried to impose a zero COVID policy in a country of 1.3 billion. Something the Australians and New Zealanders tried. Easier for them on an island. China's tried to do their best with it. What it's meant, the success of basically shutting down cities when there's 10 cases, has meant that there is not much in the way of national immunity going on there. I mean, one of the unfortunate downsides of the death toll and the case counts that we've had in the West is that you build up, some immunity there, in addition to vaccine uptake. And the Western vaccines, whether it's Pfizer, Moderna, Oxford, AstraZeneca, etc., in studies have shown to be much more efficacious than the Chinese vaccine. So add that all up, and that's the situation you got. By the way, one of the things too is that they have much lower tolerance for COVID cases than we do. We lived in reality here where we were, not shutting down, even though we had 1 million cases a day in this country. And China, tends to not tolerate more than a couple dozen cases. So there we go. Oh, Al brought the mug.
Someone asked for. Well, I surprised him. I made him a few.
Yeah, it was a nice little gift that came in the FedEx this week.
Yeah. We made that. What? Oh, I also made you stickers.
Stickers.
Yeah.
We got stuff.
Some fun stuff. Okay.
All right.
So people are saying, what if they capture Zelensky?
I shared the meme earlier today that most of us wake up in the morning, we check on Zelensky, and then we go get our coffee. That's how we're all living today. What do they do? I mean, Zelensky right now is still set to speak to the U.S. Congress on Wednesday. He is out on the streets still. He wants to appear to be fighting for his country. It seems to be working, right? Because, if people don't feel inspired by their leadership, they leave. Now, certain people are leaving just because the conditions are horrendous, but you want to inspire your country to fight another country that is literally trying to destroy your country and take it over, right? You've seen what goes on in the cities they have been able to take so far. They replace out the mayor. They put in a pro-Russian leader. They're like, hey, everyone calm down. Be nice to the new guys. And so, Zelensky wants to prevent that. What happens if he goes? It's unclear. I mean, there is a prime minister. He speaks once in a while. You have seen the foreign minister. You've seen the Klitschko brothers, who are both boxers, including Vitaly, who's the mayor of Kyiv, who's out there. I need to share a video of him tonight. He was out in the streets just showing how much damage, the destruction the Russians have waged so far.
Someone actually asked that. Who if Russia were to take over, who would they pay for
I mean, to the extent
rebuilding? That was a question.
the extent that they would want to. I mean, I don't want to entertain that scenario, and it does not appear that the Russians would be able to occupy Ukraine for very long. Remember, Ukraine, size of Texas, even with the refugees, 40 million people. And these people are throwing Molotov cocktails. These people are fighting and doing everything they can. And the Russian troops don't seem very inspired so far, and I can't imagine that 6 months from now, occupying major Ukrainian cities is going to be a thing. They've taken over 1 to 2 major cities so far. They're having trouble. Their supply lines are down. They don't have as much in the way of reinforcements. Their morale is down. I mean, there's a lot in the murkiness of war, but ultimately, I guess conceivably the Russians would rebuild some stuff. But, I don't think the Ukrainians will have Russian occupiers for very long. They're going to fight until these guys get out. That is what has been readily apparent in the first 19 days of the war.
Paula says, if Putin were to die, who would likely replace him? And would Ukraine be worse off?
It's a lot of questions there. I don't know, and no, I think are the answers to those questions. I would say we don't know who is in line for Putin. Putin's been in power since 1999, guys. He basically runs Russia himself. The people around him, it does not appear, are in a position to disagree with him. If he was to go, there is no kind of heir apparent. It kind of takes you back to the old Soviet days where you didn't quite know who was going to take over from the Politburo. Would Ukraine be better off or worse off? Probably not. No, I think in all likelihood better off. You would think that if, I don't know, let's play this out. Leadership challenge, new person's got to take over Russia. You got to try to maintain control of the main country. You don't have time for foreign stuff. That would be the concept. I think one concern about this whole theory of like taking out Putin for somebody else is if an outsider is taking out Putin, then that new leader has to retaliate for that. So you're setting off potentially a worse chain of events, if that makes sense. There was a story today, and I meant to share it from a British newspaper, that's like, oh, those Americans, they want to be so efficient and just assassinate people and like, just end it, kill them, which is apparently more of an American suggestion than other nationalities, I'm told, by folks in Europe.
Amanda says, you are my new crush. I thought she said you were my news crush, but she said you were my new crush.
Oh.
Thanks for the valuable insight.
Well, my number one crush is sitting on the couch across from me. She's my wife, Alex. But I appreciate the sentiment.
It's very kind. But look, it's so crazy when we'll be out somewhere and the two of us will be talking and all of a sudden someone will like dart eyes at you and like they recognize you're.
Well, we were on the subway and Alex and I were like discussing something and then somebody was like, oh, at the end of the subway ride was like, hey, and we're like, hey, did we say anything? Did they hear us say anything?
Anyway. I love it. Now we gotta really be careful with what we say, but
yeah, we only speak very politely about everyone and everything in public.
It is so nice when people come up to us. It really is. So please, if you see us out, please come up to us. Yeah. Okay. Oh, all these questions.
What do we got?
Okay.
Oh, I like this question.
Yeah, go.
Shelley PG asks, when and how do you see other countries stepping in? So this is the big question. One of the things that we'll be looking out for on Wednesday when Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, speaks to the U.S. Congress is, does it inspire the U.S. when he does these addresses to Congress, when he does the addresses to Parliament, when he does his addresses to these European countries? His hope is that inspires and creates more push by both politicians and citizens in those countries to give more support to Ukraine. I mean, listen, Zelensky yes, he was trained as an attorney, then he became a comedian, became an actor. He knows how to speak, he knows how to communicate. He knows how to win the information war that we're all in. Countries right now across the West, including countries like Finland, Estonia, Poland, that border Russia and have worried about Russia for 80 years, are supporting Ukraine, rhetorically and with some weapons, and taking in refugees. Something that I don't think Putin expected. Now, what's going to cause them to do even more? There's been a debate over planes. Now, you have seen the U.S. Senate. It'll be interesting what comes out of Wednesday because Zelensky's going to push for planes in a no-fly zone again and what comes out there. The Pentagon has said, and it seems like they've gotten the message to Congress that we should not be trying to do this three-way trade with MiG fighters from Poland to Ukraine in exchange for American fighters to Poland. They think that crosses a certain line and that will bring, Putin is incentivized to bring us into the war. And so we're going to do as much as we can on the ground with whatever intelligence we can provide them, whatever military assets we can provide them. Even like things like what we dropped today, guys, like the fact that we dropped yesterday that the Russians asked for aid from China is embarrassing to Putin. It's in basically psychological warfare against Putin. So you've seen this happen for the past couple of months. The U.S. has been very good that anything they get, what Putin's planning, they put it out publicly. So they're basically trying to throw constant sand in the gears of Vladimir Putin's strategy. That they're like, hey, the Russians are planning this. The Russians are planning this. The Russians are going to do this and then say this, is constantly getting in the way of Putin's plans. Which is why then Putin kept coming with excuses for the war. And then 2 weeks in, he's like, yo, bioweapons. I made bioweapons labs. And like, that's how this whole thing came about. And we're like, where the hell did the bioweapons thing come from? You've been fighting for like a couple of weeks, and now you're like, oh, they got bioweapons. Oh, is that working on the internet? Keep going with the bioweapons thing. So throwing out this stuff constantly, that's a measure of support for the Ukrainians in a way, right? Now, I do think that with the unfortunate civilian casualties you're seeing, that clearly more needs to be done, right? The world needs to enforce humanitarian corridors and get in there and let the people of like Mariupol get out. You have a town of 400,000 people, the size of Baltimore or Cleveland, where the people have been stuck there for more than a week. No power, no food, no water. They keep trying to get aid in there. Today there was a courageous group that got in cars and began a caravan out of the town. To a certain sense, some got out. But that is where the world needs to come to Ukraine's aid, because it's just you're watching innocents die right now.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
Shug Spice and Everything Nice says, do you think senators were given classified info that made them change their minds on the MIDs?
On the MiGs? Yeah, potentially. It's, like, listen, do you give the Ukrainian Air Force planes that they say they can fly? Listen, you might create potential incidents in a way, or mistakes in a way. And it does appear that the majority of the Russian damage is being caused by stuff on the ground and missiles. Now, could those planes take out some of those sites? Potentially. I think that there's a whole number of factors, some of which we probably are not going to learn for a couple more days or weeks, that is going into this calculation that we should not be pushing hard to get the Ukrainians 24 planes. Anyway.
C2 says, I guess there was something you had mentioned before. Can you play out that scenario? Like, what if the U.S./other NATO helped establish a no-fly zone? So people are asking.
So let's talk no-fly zone for a second. What's a no-fly zone? No-fly zone, you've seen them through the course of recent history. Typically, you saw them in Iraq. You saw them former Yugoslavia. And it basically means that an area exists where no military planes can fly. It's a no-fly zone, right? How does a no-fly zone get policed? Well, somebody has to do the policing. In this case, the NATO countries or the U.S. Air Force has to constantly be flying around there and policing this no-fly zone. Well, what happens when the Russians inevitably are like, yeah, let's mess with the no-fly zone? Are we shooting down a Russian jet? Well, what happens then? They're shooting down one of our jets? Now we have a war between the U.S. and Russia. This is the fear, right? That the no-fly zone prevents military jets from flying over, helicopters, etc., from bombing things. At the same time, you have now raised the potential for a direct conflict. And that's what they're weighing. And you can make 10 arguments for why, given what you're seeing on the ground, you should be trying to do a no-fly zone, that the risks and the deaths associated with no-fly zone are too much. And you can make the case, as it appears the majority of the advisors of President Biden or a number of European countries are making, that there are too many risks associated with direct conflict with the Russians. He's already dabbled in like, hey, maybe I got some nuclear weapons, let's go see how they're doing. And maybe there's a calculation that, Putin is actually a little scarier, or I don't know what term you want to use, but that Putin is willing to go further than we think he might go. And we don't want to push him further in that direction. And so that is sort of the argument that you're facing. By the way, Ukraine's a huge country. Most no-fly zones that we've policed have been smaller regions, right? If you did a no-fly zone over Kyiv, 30 miles diameter, maybe you could police that. You could do it over a couple towns. You could do it over a certain region of the West, perhaps. A no-fly zone over the entire country, that's a lot of planes, guys. There's a lot of room for error and potential conflict, and I think that is the argument right now that is winning out.
When Winnie and other people have asked this, who at the Pentagon makes these types of decisions?
So typically at the Pentagon, Pentagon's huge, right? Pentagon's, you got 100,000 plus people. You have civilian analysts, etc. You have the whole military side. You have obviously all the different branches, including the Air Force, who would be key in making assessments in regards to the no-fly zone, right? But you got the Army, you got Defense Intelligence Agency doing assessments on the ground. So when you hear intelligence assessments from the Pentagon, that might be coming from the DIA of sorts. The DIA, by the way, is one of I think we have nearly 24 intelligence agencies. The State Department has one. You might be familiar with the CIA. You might be familiar with the Department of Homeland Security as an intel agency. Then you have the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, who oversees all these intel agencies. So they're all providing intel to the White House. But you have a whole bunch of folks at the Pentagon, including folks, American key generals and soldiers who are at NATO headquarters in Europe, who are gathering their own intelligence from European countries. And so you have a whole bunch of information and intelligence sharing happening between the US, Europe, and everyone in the region who can glean something about what is going on. And so then they're all providing all of their assessments and potential recommendations to the representatives, so the Secretary of Defense and the deputies that go to the White House Situation Room and then brief the president. And the president will say, okay, what do I know? And Intel will say, this is what we got. CIA, this is what we got. Defense Department, what do you got? State Department, what do you got? Department of Energy, you guys are tracking the nuclear power plants over there. What do we know about those? And so on and so forth. Hey, Agriculture Department, what's going on with the wheat situation in Ukraine? They control 15% of the world's wheat crop. What do you got going on in terms of food? How are we going to ensure that the countries that get wheat from Ukraine are going to be fed, so there's not rioting happening in those countries? There's a whole bunch of domino effect. So you have to think about the conflict in so many different ways, and that's effectively what each part of the government is doing in a way where they have a direct connection or direct relevance to a part of what's happening over there. And of course, the State Department's involved in a lot of the refugee efforts and the humanitarian effort, and so they're briefing the president on those aspects of things.
You have so many questions, and I feel bad. I really want people to ask them again if I
Okay.
miss them. But I have a ton listed here. But Magic Mike, I just wanted to ask Magic Mike's question and one other question.
Okay.
Magic Mike asked, what is an oligarch exactly? And I know that you did a whole debrief on this, but you could. I mean, didn't you post about what?
Yeah, a while ago, but now it's like 19 days into the war. So for Mike, we'll do it again. So oligarchs were the old school oligarchs. Old school. It was the 90s. Were the first group that basically, when the Soviet Union collapsed, these were the business leaders who got industries and major companies. And oligarchy, by definition, basically means like a small group of people who controlled the government. So in this case, Soviet Union controlled everything. It was state-owned, communist system, right? And they're like, hey, we're going to start to privatize and be capitalist, and so we're going to sell off this stuff. Well, sort of done in a corrupt way. And so they were handed out to the oligarchs. You get the energy industry. You get the steel industry. You get this oil aspect of oil. So you get the refineries. Thereby, you met your first group of oligarchs, right?
You know where I learned about this? Watching The Americans.
The Americans.
I also probably learned it in school, but...
So the Americans captured the last 8 years of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So maybe aspects of it, but really when it came to fruition was the early 90s. It was like Boris Yeltsin's years, etc., and the feeling that like a couple dozen really corrupt men became very rich off the system. Then there's a new group of oligarchs that came about during Putin's era, and Putin basically had a deal with them. He's like, listen, you're going to be really rich, but I also get this % of what you make. And if you mess with me and try to take too much, then I will mess with you and put you in prison. So he put a famous oligarch in prison in like 02 or 03, and he's like, this is the bargain, guys. You want to be oligarch? You want to be rich in Russia? You want to have your yacht in Monaco? You want to have whatever? You give Vlad a certain part of the check, and you get to be oligarch. And so that effectively is oligarchy, right?
Court says, speaking of agriculture, are American farmers going to be more negatively affected by this war and sanctions on Russia than every other civilian?
It depends. I gotta look into that because we also provide a lot of wheat. I mean, you could say in a way that we'll be more dependent on American crops because of, you're missing growing season right now in Ukraine and Russia, guys. It's the spring, right? We're getting into the spring. You're prepping for a huge growing season. At the same time, given the global supply chain, I don't know what comes from. I would have to look into agriculturally what comes in from Russia and Ukraine that potentially helps certain types of crops here in the
That
US.
would be a really interesting deep dive for you to do, I think.
I haven't done my agricultural supply chain research in a while.
Do you want me to send you a text?
Al's gonna text me. Sometimes we'll be driving. I'll be like, "Text me," and I'll just like give her a random word, and she's like, "What is that?" I was like, "It's something I'm thinking about."
Well, you know what? We do that for each other. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. RLE Derosa 75 says, "What if Russia uses chemical biological warfare?"
Well, it's illegal under the UN Convention, so that'd be very concerning if they're using biological or chemical warfare. The bigger concern is that they're setting up an excuse for them to use that sort of stuff because they're saying, well, America was planning it first. It's one of the things that Russia's done for a while. They said that we developed COVID in a lab in Maryland. The Chinese said that too. And then they said that we were developing bioweapons in Georgia, the country, not the state. But I wouldn't be surprised if they blamed it on Georgia, the state too. And so are they setting up basically a scenario where they're like, well, no, those were American biological weapons that we used. And so that was the concern about the bio rhetoric last week. So I mean, listen, it would be very concerning if they try to release anthrax and use a disease. But, you know, I guess you can't, and that's biological weapons, right? Chemical are like, some of the weapons used during, you saw that during certain parts of the 20th century. You saw, you know, U.S. and others use some in Vietnam. But it would be a very concerning thing, and you would hope that in the 21st century would not be resorting to chemical and biological weapons. Most famously, some of the conventions in regards to the chemical weapons came out of World War I, when germ warfare and chemical warfare sort of came out for the first time. So it'd be extremely, extremely concerning.
Mama Shells, I know we touched on this, but Mama Shells just said, how will average Russian citizens get credible news instead of state-controlled propaganda? Either been banned or companies have pulled out, they are cut off.
So as far as average Russians, they have VPNs that allow them to get over the basically the wall, the cyber wall that the Russian government has built. But it's difficult, right? You've seen and heard stories anecdotally of
today on the Daily, there was an interview with a man who is like this big time restaurateur, does Asian restaurants in Ukraine, and he tried to reach out to his dad in Russia and tell him what was going on.
It was a different reality.
Had no idea.
Yeah, no, it's in the daily podcast that Alex is describing is one of those concerning stories where you call someone in Russia and they've been fed a completely different story. So getting stuff through is going to be challenging. Obviously, one of Putin's strategies to make it basically illegal to put fake news out there in Russia, and by fake news, things that disagree with his line, has meant that he's been successful in getting foreign journalists out of the country. Now, obviously, protests like you saw today on Russian television might lead people to ask some questions. That's why the Russian government would probably find that concerning. It needs to figure out a way to punish that and explain that to the people. But, you have a savvy group of people that can get by that stuff and read what's going on outside. And you have a group of people who are like, my country's at war and I'm being fed a certain line. And I know that there's Nazis in Ukraine and that's what we're doing. We're saving the Ukrainians. I saw a question here about when refugees are going to be coming to the U.S.
That's my question.
Oh, we're going to Magic Mike coming in hot from the Midwest.
He's been an OG follower since
So, refugees U.S. Right now we have a policy in the U.S. where we only take 10,000 Europeans a year. We have immigration quotas, effectively, and they've been that way for a long, long time. You can go back a century, and it's like you can take this many from this country, this many from this continent, this many from this country, and then when crises happen, we tend to change them. We haven't seen a change there yet. We have sort of made the visas more lax for Ukrainians who are already here, so they can stay here. As far as taking in, an Afghanistan-style amount of Ukrainians, I haven't seen us ready to do that. I would imagine we're going to get to that stage pretty soon. Now that Poland, for example, has taken in nearly, 1.5 million of the refugees because they border there. They have some shared culture. By the way, the largest minority of the largest minority in Poland is Ukrainians. Also, interesting factoid. Beyond Russia has the most amount of Ukrainians in it. The second largest Ukrainian population outside Ukraine, besides Russia, in Canada. So Canada and Justin Trudeau, the folks up north, have said that they are are happy to take on some Ukrainian refugees. Where, as far as numbers, I think they're trying to develop, that some of the State Department's working on in the U.S. and the equivalent in Canada, how they take that in, what those numbers are they taking them from certain places, where are they vetting them, etc. That's something they got to figure out.
Okay, so I don't know that you can answer this sufficiently, but you could try. L. Reaver says, what's your opinion on how many Russians really support Putin?
I have no idea. I mean, anybody who tries to take a poll inside Russia, you have to caveat it with the fact that, like, we hope they were telling us the truth. We hope that they didn't think we were involved in the government, because, like, at any given point, you try to share a position with a pollster in Russia that's critical or not in line with something Putin says, it's difficult to say. You could gut check it and say that probably the majority of Russians right now, based on what they're being fed media-wise, and just overall Putin's support until now, probably going into this would have been supportive of what Putin was saying he was going to do in Ukraine. Now, what those results were and what Russians are actually learning actually about what's happening in Ukraine, it'd be interesting to see what that evolution of views would be. Now, again, it's very hard to get that gauge. Where do you get that gauge of what's going on there? So I get asked that a lot. Like, how do Russians feel about it? And the ones who will share their views will be like, I saw on TV that we're doing good stuff, and the Ukrainians, are happy that we're going in there. And then you have people like the journalists today who are defying. So it's very hard to get to truth there. And that's part of your goal as an authoritarian regime, is to constantly question truth. What do you believe? Is there such a thing as truth? And if if people have read 1984, George Orwell, or Fahrenheit 451, you live in a reality where you're constantly questioning stuff, and there's only one voice from the government, and it's not worth it to defy it, because then those people are never seen from or heard from again. So that's an unfortunate situation that the average Russian civilian's in. What else now?
Laura Winchell says, and other people have asked this too, will you talk about Elon Musk?
Oh, God. So Elon, who we learned, by the way, congratulations to Elon on his 7th child last week. Second with his, he's not really his girlfriend. They're just having kids. Grimes, yeah. Because Grimes is with somebody else. Grimes is dating somebody else, but having a child with Elon. Anyway, Elon today, he's obviously been assisting the Ukrainians with Starlink to get some internet connections, but he decided to tweet at Putin today and the Russian government to challenge Putin to a duel, and say that the stakes of the duel are Ukraine. I don't know that the Ukrainians have decided to give up their fate to Elon Musk, and that Elon in the duel, listen, Putin's like a judo master. So I don't know what's our weapon of choice, and why Elon thinks he could physically take on. I don't know what captures Elon, but Elon's just like one stop short of Kanye when it comes to tweets sometimes, right? Just saying. Though, in one case, one of them is the richest person in the history of Earth and is worth $240 billion.
Is he going with Pete Davidson next week?
Kanye? Yeah. Or Elon?
No, Elon.
Well, no, Elon has his own space company. Pete's going with Jeff Bezos's.
Jeff Bezos. Okay.
Yeah, so Pete Davidson's going up to space on March 24th with a couple people, with Bezos's company. So, I don't know.
That's funny.
Elon should put Kanye up in space.
I was trying to talk to you about what was happening with Kanye this weekend, and you wanted to hear none of it.
No, I don't have the capacity right now for the Kanye, Pete Davidson text screenshot.
It is very sad what's happening there. Okay, but this is even sadder, so let's go back to Ukraine. Okay. Matthew DeVoe said, can we send Russia their own Mosh?
Oh, no, I wouldn't. Based on what I'm saying right now, I should not go to Moscow. It wouldn't be good.
Magic Mike said, is there a place we can donate to people who have left Ukraine and need help? Can people take their children if they need that? Just wondering all aspects to help. And then a lot of people said World WC Kitchen.
World Central Kitchen, who they've been there since the beginning. That's Jose Andres. But we shared, and I'll reshare the refugee organizations that are helping all those folks. You have a situation in Poland where now 1 of 10 residents of Warsaw is a Ukrainian refugee. They're 10% and it's growing. And this is largest city in Poland, right? A city of country of 40 million, city of about 2 million. And so that is a challenge these countries are taking on, and they're going to need help. And, I shared the video today of the 2 Ukrainian children who were greeted at a school outside of Naples, Italy. And, countries are, to the extent that they can, accepting refugees and trying to integrate them into their societies. But you're facing a very long-term challenge here.
Yanni just joined. She said, I'm late to the show here, but I see the new setup and there's no badges on the bottom. What do I do?
No badges.
So,
I know there's only a couple people who have badges this week. I gotta work with the Instagram folks. Take a screenshot where if you have badges, and take a screenshot if you don't have a badge option, and DM it to me, and I gotta send it to the Instagram powers that be.
I'm messaging now your Venmo info.
Okay.
But you could pin it if you want. I don't know. Do you have anything pinned now? No, you don't.
I don't.
Okay. So next question. Melissa said, what happens when countries like Poland run out of room, I guess, for refugees?
I mean, then they move on, right? The UK is going to take 200,000. France is figuring out what they're going to do. Germany's going to figure out what they're going to do. Scandinavia is going to figure out what they're going to do. And then you have Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic, Moldova. You have a bunch of countries that have taken on more of the refugees. They're going to move on to the next thing. They're going to look for a home, right? It's unfortunately what happens. It's what some of you have said, this reminds me of what my grandparents or great-grandparents went through, or my parents went through, depending on what conflict they came out of. It's I hear that my cousin's friend has a place in Detroit. I hear that my aunt's second cousin's, colleague from work has a place in Buenos Aires. That is unfortunately the situation as these refugees seek a new life and this war prolongs. Now, the longer this war goes on, the more apt some of these people will be to be I don't want to go back to Ukraine. And for most of these people, they want to go back home. This is temporary. I want to go back home. I want to go back to my home. I want to go back to my business. I want to go back to my community. And that's why so many people are staying because they want to fight for it. And then some people need to go because they, want to make sure their kids survive. The men are staying behind in many cases, partially because they have to, based on the government. And then, you saw the story of the girl who sang the Frozen song. And she was sent off, she was 7 years old, with her brother 15. They were just sent off to their grandmother in Poland, and the parents stayed behind because the parents are making food to help support the soldiers in their town. And that's, it's a reality that we thought we, hopefully wouldn't have to see again, that you see in warfare all the time. You saw it in Syria. You see it in the conflicts in Africa. You see it in Afghanistan. You see in Afghanistan, people are how could they give their baby away to the soldiers? It's just make sure my kid can survive. I don't think I can get out. And this is a scenario that we're very privileged to, most of us will never experience. And that's unfortunately the situation we face.
My Alexis 4 says what's the likelihood of Putin being convicted of war crimes?
The likelihood is, moderate. Ramifications, I don't know.
How does that happen?
There's a war crimes tribunal in The Hague, in the Netherlands, but they don't have a police force. They can't go to Russia and arrest him and say, we're taking you up for war crimes. Russia would have to give him up, or Putin would be like, I'm going to go on trial, guys, peace out, I'm going to take a flight to The Hague. He's not doing that. He's staying in Russia. He's in power. So it's at some point, there's all this talk of war crimes, and war crimes are committed, and there's certain generals and Putin and folks who would be to blame here, but ultimately they will never spend a day behind bars. They will never spend a day in trial because they're not leaving Russia. And no one can show up in Russia from the Hague, from the tribunal, from the war crimes court to be you need to come with us. Under what power? By the way, do you know who also hasn't signed who doesn't feel they're privy to the war crimes tribunal in The Hague? The United States of America, baby. We also have not signed into that. So we also don't want The Hague to have a trial of American leaders potentially for war crimes. And so it's a whole complicated story. It goes back to the Bush administration. But just to let you know, there's a number of countries that are not signatories to this. And even countries that are, their leaders may not want to give themselves up for a trial by an outside court. Go ahead.
Alina Peterson said, my family is still in Ukraine. They don't want to leave home.
Yeah. I feel for them and I pray for them and I hope that they stay safe amid all of this. And I understand the sentiment. You like your home, you want to fight for it, and you don't have to say goodbye to it. No one deserves to go through that.
The Modern Mackie has asked several questions tonight, and I feel bad that I haven't gotten to them, so I'm going to ask some of them right now.
Okay.
Okay. What do you make of reports of 40,000 Syrian recruits coming to help Putin?
So Putin says he doesn't need any help from the Chinese, but he's happy to take 20 to 40,000, depending on who you believe, recruits from Syria and Iran to help him with the fight. Remember that the Russians helped Assad, the leader, dictator of Syria, basically destroy his country in the civil war so he could preserve his own leadership. The Russians helped them and were there as he used chemical weapons against his own people in Syria. So this is sort of return the favor to Russia by sending some troops up there. Based on what we all know about them, they're also probably questionably trained, have low morale. But in this case, they're fighting. They're fighting to fight, and they're not having to fight their own people. So they might be more incentivized than some of the Russian soldiers are to fight their Ukrainian brothers. So I think that's basically some Middle Eastern leaders returning the favor to Putin.
The next question was thoughts on Russia reportedly blocking the Iran deal.
So the thing about the Iran deal is very interesting. So the Iran deal goes back to 2015. Basically, the idea there, it's called the JCPOA, is the acronym for it, is how do we get the West, how do we get the Iranians not to develop nuclear weapons? Because we know what happens when a country has nuclear weapons. You can never, it's difficult to go to war with them, it's difficult to get them to do anything, and it's difficult to get rid of a regime that you might not like. Point and parcel, North Korea. We can't get rid of Kim Jong-un because his father and grandfather helped develop nuclear weapons, and so we're stuck with him being, a pain. First of all, a tyrant to his own people and a total pain in the region, and constantly threatening his neighbors. So how do we prevent Iran, a leader, a government run by the Ayatollah that funds and supports terror across the region and, frankly, around the world? And it's basically meant that Iran, 90 million people, have been cut off from the global economy for the better part of 40 years. Even though they sit on some of the largest natural gas and oil assets, and the Persian people, the Iranian people, are some of the most knowledgeable, smart, productive people in the world, and could be incredible contributors, and were, before the Ayatollah took control. So we tried our hand at sanctions for 40 years, and at some point Obama was like, okay, these sanctions don't seem to be working. Let's come up with a deal because they're still developing nuclear weapons. Let's make a deal. We let them enter the global economy. We lift some of the sanctions. In return, they don't build nuclear weapons. And that agreement went into effect. And it was in effect for 3 years, from 2015 to 2018. And that deal was not just U.S.-Iran. It was U.S., China, Europe, Russia, and Iran. In 2018, Trump administration decides we're pulling out of this deal. This deal sucks. Trump's like, I want a new deal. Iran's not abiding by the deal. They pull out of the deal, and a couple months later, he goes to the Ayatollah. He's like, come back. Well, let's make a new deal, a better deal. And Iran's like, get out of here, Trump. So that was the last couple of years. They went back to building, continuing to build nuclear weapons, etc. Biden comes in. He's like, let's bring back the deal from when I was vice president, and now that's being negotiated. The thing you're referring to is the Russians are like, can we cut into the deal that whatever sanctions stay in place for Iran, we don't have to abide by in Russia, because guess what? You guys are killing us right now. With all these sanctions. So we want to be able to do our own trade with Iran and not have to follow any rules with them. And so everyone's like, well, why are we giving special treatment to the Russians, especially given what they're doing to Ukraine? So when you have this five-way deal happening, basically Europe, US, Russia, China, Iran, the Russians are asking for a special side deal, and that's what you're referring to. It's a very complicated thing. You saw 49 Republican senators today in the Senate say F this deal, we're not supporting it, especially after the Iranians sent missiles near the U.S. base in northern Iraq over the weekend. Wrote a bit about it in the newsletter this morning. And so that's the space you're in. One side says, let's make a deal with Iran to stop them from nuclear weapons so we can monitor what's going on. Other side says, no, you can't trust those guys. Don't make a deal. And let's, through intelligence means and military means, continue to stop them from nuclear weapons. And that is the two sides of the debate right now.
I just want to mention what Alina just said, because her family's still in Ukraine. She said, It's definitely difficult to leave when your motherland is screaming for help. Our country is strong, our people are proud, and our blood is thick with pride.
Yeah, amen. The Ukrainian people have, I think, surprised Putin in terms of how much and how strong they've been willing to stand up to him. He was expecting a situation similar to 2014, where he's able to take Crimea pretty quickly, and Zelensky and the Ukrainian people have said, no, we learned our lesson from 2014. We're not allowing this to happen to our country again. And they have stood up, and they continue to stand strong, and it's one of the reasons why the world is so united around Ukraine right here, is the Ukrainian strength standing up and unanimously to the Russians.
It's just me, Kelly says. Any updates on the reporter Benjamin Hall who was injured?
I haven't seen any reports tonight. I heard that he was in a bad situation.
What network? Well, who was
he was a Fox News correspondent, British Fox News correspondent, 39 years old, who's been doing some really great work for Fox in Ukraine. He is now the latest journalist who was wounded. There's no details. I haven't seen details yet on the exact nature. Typically, when you're in war in your media, you wear a big press, across your bulletproof vest. You wear it on your helmet. It's very clear that, who you are. You're not carrying a gun. You're carrying a camera. Unfortunately, we're waiting for more details there. I saw the latest note from the president of Fox News saying, they're praying for him and he's hospitalized, and we'll wait for updates on him tonight and tomorrow.
Thank you to everyone who's thanking us. Thank you for all your questions, because we couldn't do this without you guys.
Thank you guys for all the good questions tonight.
And Susan says, Mosh, you are the best news source. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you guys for your support. My work is nothing compared to the incredible people who are helping the refugees out there, the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their country. But I'm trying my best to, reflect what's going on there, a portion of what's going on there, to give you guys a sense of, what's happening. I try every morning, afternoon, and evening to kind of get a sense of European media, what's going on with some of the reporters who are on the ground there, American media, the extent that, you get a sense of like what's going on the Russian side too, and try to what's happening inside Ukraine, what's happening in the north, the south, the humanitarian crisis, the political leadership, what's happening inside Russia, what's happening with refugees, what's the reaction of the refugees, what's the deal in Washington, and kind of have I hit those key corners, because those are the various parts of the story, right? So, and at the same time, when Iran decides to lob some missiles at Iraq, you're like, I got to figure out what's going on there too. So, trying our best. Definitely stuff that we're missing, trying our best to stay on top of it,
You're only one guy, Mom.
We're one person.
Thanks to a lot of your followers who send you things,
Oh yeah, I love when you guys DM stuff, and then Alex is incredibly supportive. She's constantly looking for stories out there, and she's much better at Reddit than I am. Al, you're like a Reddit queen. We have intern Jonathan in Washington. We need to get intern Jonathan on a live one of these nights. We should talk to him. He helps collect stories out there for us, and the team continues to grow.
Yes, and we have to make merch. But
yes.
First, I don't want to forget this question, and then we'll do a post on this in your stories later tonight. Loving Life 980 says, Mosh, can you give us a list of your all-time favorite books? If you want, we can post that to your stories tonight.
All-time favorite books. So there's an Amazon store. We've put a bunch of books in Amazon store, on Alex's Amazon store.
I have it on my Amazon store, so I'll have Mosh post it tonight so that you can see the list of his favorite books.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. iPort says, can you please make an Instagram post of why this war is different than the wars in the Middle East in the past? Lots of people saying this war is biased since it's impacting white people.
Every war is different. I know that some people have done specific posts on differences between wars. Some of those people have agendas. In this case, it's two independent countries. One has invaded another, seeking to change leadership. So some people are trying to compare it to the U.S. war in Iraq, right? Where we tried to take out Saddam and change their leadership. Well, sort of, but not really. That's different. And each of those wars have their own issues and whatnot. So I think that I would have to write a book, and it wouldn't be an Instagram post if I was to try to compare and contrast why this war is different from other wars. Every war is different. Every war is terrible. Anyone who's purporting to say these people, it's just like the situation of the minority group in Ethiopia, just like South Africa, just like the Palestinians, just like the Iraqis, just like the Afghans. No, they're all different. They all have different, stories behind them. They all have different sides with different motivations, and either legitimate or illegitimate grievances. And so ultimately, I'm not in the business of doing a compare and contrast of wars around the world. I would say that this war is terrible, and let's focus on that, and let's focus on resolving that as quickly as possible. And let's also focus on resolving these other conflicts without trying to conflate stuff. I know it's easy for people who are just like, oh, it's just much easier for me to like look at the world through one lens. No. Everything is complex, and our domestic issues here have nothing to do with issues there, and there's issues of culture and race and religion and ethnicity and etc. And those are all different in each of these conflicts. There are certain things that unite certain folks, but then we could play metaphorical games all day long saying, well, this side is like this side, but this side is also like the other side in some ways too. So what are we accomplishing? I don't know. I mean, are we in a theory class, in some sort of master's conflict resolution class? Maybe, but I don't know.
Scram004 says, are larger news organizations pulling their journalists out due to the loss of life recently?
So I haven't heard in the past 24 hours any sort of urgent pullout. I imagine they're all doing security assessments right now. The biggest pullout I heard when it comes to journalists was in Russia due to the new laws there and the concern that reporting basic facts now in Russia could land foreign reporters in jail. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I mean, listen, guys, it's not an accident that some journalists have been targeted recently. Russia doesn't want journalists there documenting what's going on. The less independent cameras that are there, the better it is for Putin. So, okay. Do you want to, in some ways, you don't want to let him win. In some ways, you also don't, not in some ways, in many ways, in all ways, you don't want to lose any innocent civilian journalists, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters on your, on your team either. So I think there's definitely a serious conversation happening right now within media organizations. Are we safe? Are we being targeted? What sort of guarantees can we get from the Ukrainians and the Russians that they avoid journalists at all costs?
JP and Trick says, what's going on with China and Taiwan? You've gotten that a couple times.
Yeah, so in addition to China being asked allegedly by the Russians if they can help, there's a big question of like, what lessons is China taking from Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Taiwan, Russia, China, Taiwan, the Chinese still view as part of China. One China policy. How did Taiwan's government get started? They were the Democrats who escaped China when the communists took over, right? They got on boats, went over to Taiwan. So China for like 50, 60 years is like, we want it back. That's part of China. And the world has effectively said to the Chinese, nope, you're going to let Taiwan stay democratic. Now, does China look at what Russia's doing to Ukraine and be like, oh, we can get away with just invading another country and the West isn't going to do anything besides like toss some sanctions at us? Well, for Russia, it means one thing. For China, it means another thing because China is set to be the world's largest economy. I think before this, Russia had like the 11th largest economy in the world or something like that. Not insignificant, but like basically New York State's economy or Texas's economy was the size of Russia's economy before this war. Much smaller now. So in terms of global impact, China's ambitions to run the world, does China choose now to take Taiwan? Probably not. I think China plays the long game, guys. China's been around for thousands of years. Do they say maybe, given the trajectory America's on, maybe now is not the time for Taiwan, but maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now? China plays the long game. So I don't immediately fear a Chinese push into Taiwan, but again, we were a bit surprised by the Putin action, but it seems kind of drastic given what China's short-term focus is.
Okay. Ian Wizzle, among many other people, asks, What is going on with Brittany Griner? What happened to the American basketball player detained in Russia? I mean, the questions go on and on.
So she's the WNBA player. The U.S. Embassy has been denied access to her. I was reading this earlier today. She was arrested last month for carrying allegedly a vape pen with some hash oil in it. She was arrested at the airport February 17th, so it's been a month now, just before the invasion started. her arrest was made public about 3 weeks after her actual arrest. And so apparently there's a congressman, Colin Allard, who said that she's being held without any official government access to her. And it's pretty concerning. She allegedly faces up to 10 to 20 years for her alleged vape pen incident at the airport. By the way, Brittany, she plays for an WNBA team in Arizona, but she also plays for a team in Russia where they pay her nearly 5 times what she makes. She makes almost $1 million a year in Russia, which is why she went back. But, she's a foreign national, and typically during non-times of war, we would have had some access to her. We would have some knowledge about her, and we don't right now. Now, at the same time, you can imagine the State Department and the White House are talking to the Russians, because you're always talking and there's always phone lines open about that whole situation. You can imagine the Russians might be saying, well, if we give you Brittany, what are you giving us? Unfortunately, right? It's a pawn. They use people as pawns. So I do hope for a positive update in the Griner situation soon. But yeah, we're nearly a month in, and we still don't know much more than we knew when the first details came out.
So I feel like this is a good final question.
Okay.
There are some more questions that you haven't gotten to, but I'm going to save them, and then maybe in your stories you can get to them.
And I do want to get to this Poland question because I've gotten it a few times. So what's your question? And I'll talk Poland.
Yeah, why don't you ask the Poland question?
Okay. So people keep asking about bombing your Poland border, scare tactic, or NATO engagement. I think it's a little bit of both, guys, right? Putin over the weekend started bombing western Ukraine. Western side of Ukraine is the far side, the furthest part from Russia, closest to Europe. Not accidentally. One, it's where all the refugees are. Two, the U.S. had a major base there where they were training the Ukrainians before the war. That's the Florida National Guard was there. We pulled the Florida National Guard out before the war. In that area is also where we are bringing in some of the new weapons. That area is also near Europe, near the NATO border. Russia's kind of testing, like, hey, look, we can bomb you pretty close. And that's what we know so far. So not an accident by the Russians. They're definitely trying to send a message. And it's like continuing, for lack of a better metaphor, it's like when your child tries to see how far they can push you on something, whether it's their bedtime or TV time or how many snacks they get or later in their life, in their teenage years, their curfew, etc. They're testing to see what they can get away with, see if there's a punishment for these things. And that's what the Russians are up to. I don't think, whether the Russians actually drop a bomb on the other side of the border, that's a whole nother story. Then you're hitting NATO, and the Russians know NATO's been very serious that they will face NATO's wrath if they touch a NATO country. But I think, Russia's trying to make it pretty clear that they have reached within all of Ukraine, sending a message to both the Ukrainian government, Zelensky, as well as the West. Final question.
Just going back to Brittany, Kate G, 1977, I thought had a great point. I just want to mention. A professional female athlete in the U.S. shouldn't have to go play overseas in the off-season because they don't get paid enough in their league.
Yeah, tell that to the, more people to start going to WNBA games, buy WNBA merch, etc. It's an unfortunate reality that you do see, between men's sports and women's sports. But part of the issue is that if women's sports can continue to develop a larger fan base, then they have more ticket sales, then they have more merch sales, then the teams have more money to pay those athletes. But unfortunately, and by the way, it's not just women's sports, it's some other sports, right? Like men's soccer and some of the other leagues that are not kind of the most popular leagues in the U.S. where those athletes, they're not making millions and millions of dollars, right? Some of them are making $60,000 or $80,000 to play sports, and so they're playing off season that sport for other countries and in other ways. But yeah, it's an unfortunate reality, and let's hope that women's sports continue to build the fan bases that they've been doing, and so people like Brittany don't need to be playing basketball for a Russian oligarch in Siberia.
Matthew DeVoe said, going back to what we were just talking about, how quick would response be from NATO if they hit a NATO country?
I'm not privy to NATO's strategy inside Brussels right now, But I would imagine that if they determined that there was a Russian attack on a NATO country and they could pinpoint where that attack came from, that there would be a very swift response. Because what is the point of NATO if it's existed for 80 years and you have Article 5, which means all countries defend your fellow countries, if you don't respond? Then you're basically showing the world that NATO is nothing. So you can imagine that response, once confirmed that it's not some sort of inside incident, wasn't sort of mistake, that there would be a quick response to show the Russians that you're not going to get away with this. Especially after saying it repeatedly.
I love
DeVoe.
I love that now people are like Jesse. Oh, Jesse Dinner.
Jesse Dinner's on.
Can we get
the
an
pride
MO,
of
he said,
the
with
pride of Tufts University. He's a jumbo.
He said, "Can we get an MO with the globe, like your logo?"
Yeah.
I still have to meet you, Jesse Dinner.
Yeah, you haven't met my wife yet, Dinner.
So
meet Alex.
let's close out with this question from Regan.
Yeah.
Does the news of the world stress you out? How do you both manage your own well-being in all of this heaviness? It's so much.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, I guess I was always raised on the philosophy that things could be tougher, which,
because your father was.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not my father, trained me. He's like, I come from school and he's like, like this happened. He's like, well, it could be worse. I'm like, you're right. So I guess I guess I'm naturally, and I'm sure some therapists have said that isn't quite the right way you should be viewing things all the time. That everyone's entitled to their feelings and whatever. But I will say that I guess it helps me adapt to the realities of covering, challenges around the world, which is like, my challenges are nothing compared to the challenges that I'm seeing out there. So I figure out a way to compartmentalize that stuff. But yeah, it weighs on you, and you got to take a mental health break from this stuff.
I scheduled a massage for him last week. I make sure he's fed. We try. I mean, right now it's hard because we're working on the newsletter late at night. But you try to get sleep. But it just happens that during situations, times like this, it's harder to make time for self-care.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't like to focus on on the petty challenges that I face compared to the unfortunate challenges of the people who are like lifting their grandmother across a river to get through Irpin amid Russian gunfire. But it's challenging, and I guess one of the tactics I use is that I look for good, right? Like that at the end of the day, you might be focused on conflict and bad and whatever, but ultimately you're able to find positive stories. You find people helping people. And that gives you hope, right? That you see evil happening, but at the same time you see good things happening, and so I don't know. I tend to look at the bright side of things.
Yes, and I also think that's why a lot of people like to follow you, because you're not sensational, and when you post things, you post facts, and you try not to.
Those facts are depressing, though.
It is true.
Sorry, guys. Some people are like, can you please make the news more positive? I try. I look. It's hard. Especially right now.
Arzurahi said, I'm a first-time viewer. Love this.
Wait, is that Arzu Riahi who gave me the tour of GW when I first toured? There was an Arzu. And I don't know if it's the same one. But Arzu, a woman named Arzu gave me a campus tour when I was touring GW as a senior in high school.
And you remember?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because my dad speaks a little. My dad was with me, and I remember he was asking a lot of questions.
He came with you on the.
He came with me on the campus tour.
Oh, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall.
Anyway, is the live always on Monday? Yes, every Monday as we can help it, 9 p.m. Eastern. I love everyone sharing the Mr. Rogers quote. Always look for the helpers. Yeah, it's the same Arzu. Arzu.
What?
Gave me a tour 23 years ago this spring of GW's campus.
That is unbelievable.
22 years ago this fall. Yeah, 22 years ago this spring. Anyway, is that crazy?
KG said that's impressive.
I will say this. This is sad. In that time, Vladimir Putin's been president the entire time. Bring it back to the news. Since the spring of 2000.
By the way, you didn't even mention Tom Brady tonight. I mean...
Oh, God, Tom Brady. We haven't talked about Tom Brady. Or the NCAA tournament. I hope you guys are filling out your brackets. Will Gonzaga go down? Will they survive? This is the first year, by the way, the women, we're talking about women's sports and equality, have a field of 68 and also had a selection Sunday. some people yesterday were like, "Oh, post the women's bracket." I was like, "Well, the women are going at 8 o'clock, and the men went at 6 o'clock, so I had to wait for the women's bracket to come out." Anyway, love to all of you. Take care of yourselves.
Someone said, I don't see badges yet.
I know, I got to get to this badges thing. Take a screenshot. If you see badges, take a screenshot. If you don't see badges on the bottom screen, I need evidence for the folks in Menlo Park, California, to fix the system.
Now, if you want to support Mosh, you could just Venmo him, and then we'll,
Yeah, so a couple ways to support this account. We have a Venmo link, and then we have a the new Mo News newsletter. You could subscribe to the premium edition of that.
Which you are getting rave reviews on.
We got some people who like
my
it.
My dad, who watches the news, watches the news every day, reads the newspaper, is so well, plugged in, which is why I am the way I am, thanks to him. He read your newspaper and he said, he read your newsletter and he said, Mosh, wow, what you're doing is really great. So coming from my dad,
I just want you guys to know.
That's a big deal.
I've been endorsed by my father-in-law.
It is a big deal.
The newsletter is endorsed by my father-in-law.
Yeah, even Nora Flynn says the newsletter is amazing.
All right. Well, some people said it was too long. Some people like the length of it. 3 days a week. Listen, I like the feedback. It's hard to strike that balance. We got to figure that out. All right. Thank you very much. We got a lot to get to.
I have to go cook now.
Alex has to go cook. She's going to be taking over. Can I say it?
You can say it.
The Jews of New York Instagram account. We will promote it with a special recipe for the Jewish holiday of Purim, which incidentally, long story short, Purim, 1,000 plus years ago, the Jews were in Iran, modern day Iran. They were trying to kill all the Jews. The Jews get saved by their queen. It's short story, long story, etc. Anyway, it's like many Jewish holidays where they tried to kill the Jews. The Jews survived. And so now we celebrate, including by making these pastries we call hamantash, these triangular pastries, which have many delicious fillings. And Alex has an amazing recipe she will be sharing on Instagram.
If you want it now, though, if you want
it's already up on your Instagram.
It's already up on my Instagram at Alice Hall.
Yes.
Both
it's a gluten-free recipe.
Both the filling and the dough, but I'm also going to be doing it again for Jews of New York because, to be honest, there are really no gluten-free hamantash recipes out there that are good.
We looked for them.
Even from the top bakeries. We've tried them, and we're
not loving them. So Alex created her own recipe, and I think it's pretty damn good.
That means a lot coming from me.
Hey, listen, I have very high standards. My wife knows that, and I give very honest feedback, and this is very good.
It's a winner.
Yes. All right. Thank everyone. Take care of yourselves. Keep sending in story ideas, your thoughts on things. Some of you just like to vent about life to me. That's okay. I'll accept your DMs.
Magic Mike says, Mosh and Alex are friends in my head. And the truth is, we are your friends, Magic Mike. We are. Our community is so great. I feel like you are my,
Yeah, come up to us on the street.
In person, I do feel like we're friends.
Anyway. All right. Thank you, friends. See you soon. Talk to you.